Let me ask you something personal. Not a question you answer out loud, a question you sit with. When was the last time you felt completely in control of your own life? Not your schedule, not your appearance, not the version of you that shows up to meetings and replies to messages and smiles when it's expected. I mean truly in control of your mind, of your reactions, of the direction you are actually moving. Because here's what I've noticed. Most people aren't living, they're reacting. Something happens at work and they carry it home. Someone says something careless and it lives in their head for 3 days. Plan falls apart and they spend more energy grieving it than building a new one. You wake up in the morning already tired, not physically, mentally, emotionally, like the weight of everything unfinished, everything uncertain, everything you're supposed to control but can't. It's all sitting on your chest before you've even opened your eyes. Does that sound familiar? I think it does, because it's not just you, it's almost everyone. We are living in an age of infinite noise and almost zero stillness. You are bombarding. Notifications, opinions, comparisons, the relentless pressure to have more, do more, be more, all before you figured out who you actually are. And underneath all of that noise, there's a quiet crisis happening. The crisis of a person who has everything they need to build a great life, of no philosophy to stand on, no framework, no anchor, nothing to come back to when the storm hits. And the storm always hits. So here's what this video is about. Not motivation. Motivation fades, not positivity. Positivity without depth is just decoration. This is about something older, something harder, something that has survived 2,000 years of wars, collapses, empires rising and falling, because it actually works. This is about Stoicism. And before you think you already know what that means, stay with me, because most people have it completely wrong. Here is the truth. Nobody is going to say to you gently, the way you are currently processing your life is not working. Not because you're weak, not because you lack intelligence, but because you were never given the right tools. Think about it. You spent years in school learning history, mathematics, literature, subjects that trained your mind to absorb information. But did anyone ever sit you down and teach you how to handle failure? How to face loss without losing yourself? How to exist inside uncertainty without drowning in anxiety? No, they didn't. Almost no one did. So what happened? You learned by default. You absorbed the coping mechanisms of the people around you. If your parents avoided conflict, you avoided conflict. If the culture around you said, bury your feelings and push through, you buried your feelings and pushed through. And for a while it probably worked, or seemed to work. But at some point, and I think for many of you, that point has already arrived. The old strategies stopped holding. The avoidance stopped working. The performance of being okay stopped feeling sustainable. And you started asking a deeper question, a question most people are too afraid to even form. Is there actually a better way to live inside my own mind? Yes, there is. But it requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires you to look at your own thinking. Really look at it and be honest about how much of it is actually serving you versus how much of it is just habit. Stoicism is not a life hack. It is not a weekend seminar. It is a practice, a daily, sometimes uncomfortable, deeply honest practice. And the first thing it will ask of you is this: stop blaming the world for your inner state. That's the brutal truth. And it's also the beginning of everything. Stoicism was born in Athens around 300 BC. A man named Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck. His cargo, his livelihood, his plan for the future. He washed up on shore with almost nothing. He walked into a bookshop in Athens, read about Socrates, and something changed in him. He didn't spend the next decade grieving what the sea took. He spent it building something the sea couldn't take, a philosophy of the mind. He started teaching in a painted porch, the Stoa Poikile. That's where the name comes from. Stoicism, from the porch. After Zeno came Epictetus, a man who was born into slavery, who had no physical freedom, no legal rights, no certainty about his own future. And yet, Epictetus became one of the most free human beings who ever lived, because he understood something that most people with all their freedom never grasp. He understood that the mind is a kingdom, and no one can invade it without your permission. Then came Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth. And he wrote his most honest thoughts in a private journal, not for fame, not for legacy, but just to remind himself daily how to be a better human being. 3 men, 3 wildly different lives, 1 philosophy. And the thread that connects all of them is this: you cannot control what happens. You can only control who you are in response to what happens. That single idea is the spine of everything that follows. Pillar 1. The Dichotomy of Control. Epictetus opened his great work, the Enchiridion, with what might be the most important sentence in the history of philosophy. He wrote, "Some things are in our control and others not." That's it. That's the whole thing. 6 words. In our control. Our thoughts, our choices, our values, our effort. How we treat people, how we spend our attention. What we decide to believe. Not in our control. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, traffic, illness, the past, the future. Whether someone loves you back, whether the market crashes, whether the test comes back positive. Now stop and sit with that list, because here's what I want you to notice. Most of what the average person worries about every single day is on the second list. We spend enormous amounts of mental energy on things that were never in our hands. We lie awake crafting responses to conversations that may never happen. We play out worst-case scenarios about outcomes we cannot predict. We rehearse arguments with people who aren't even in the room. And then we wonder why we're exhausted. The Stoics would say you are not exhausted by life. You are exhausted by your own resistance to it. Here is what the dichotomy of control actually asks of you. Not to stop caring, not to become passive or detached, but to redirect. Every time you feel anxious, ask, is this something I can act on or something I can only worry about? If you can act, act with full energy and full commitment. If you cannot, release it. Not because it doesn't matter, but because holding it costs you everything and changes nothing. Think of an archer. She trains, she breathes, she aims with everything she has, and then she releases the arrow. She cannot control the wind. She cannot guarantee where the arrow lands. Her job is the training, the breath, the aim. That's where her effort lives. The outcome is not hers to control. This is what the Stoics called preferred indifference. Things you work toward but do not attach your entire identity to. You work for success, but you are not broken by failure. You strive for health, but you are not destroyed by illness. You love fully, but you are not undone by loss. That is not coldness, that is strength. Practice this today, just today. Every time worry rises, ask yourself one question. Is this in my control? If yes, Act. If no, return to what is. Pillar 2. Amor, Fati. Love your fate. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, in the quiet hours before leading an empire, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This idea has a name in Stoic philosophy: Amor Fati, love of fate, not tolerance of fate, not reluctant acceptance of fate. Love. And I want to be honest with you about how radical that is. Because everything in modern culture tells you the opposite. It tells you obstacles are failures. Difficulty is a sign you chose wrong. If it's hard, it's not meant to be. But the Stoics looked at 2,000 years of human experience and came to a completely different conclusion. They said, difficulty is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that something real is happening. Think about your own life for a moment. The version of yourself you are most proud of. Where did that person come from? Not from the easy seasons, not from the times when everything worked and nothing required much of you. That version of you was built in the hard rooms, in the conversations that broke you open, in the failures that forced you to rethink everything, in the losses that made you discover what you actually valued. The Stoics understood something that takes most people a lifetime to accept. Adversity is not the interruption of your development. It is your development. It is quite literally impossible to build patience without something that tests it. You cannot develop courage without something that frightens you. You cannot know what you're made of until life puts some pressure on the material. The fire doesn't destroy the steel, it creates it. So the question Stoicism asks is not, how do I avoid hard things? The question is, how do I meet them in a way that builds me rather than breaks me? And the answer begins with a shift in framing. A shift so small it seems almost too simple, but it changes everything. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this preparing me for? Not as a spiritual bypass, not to avoid the pain, but as a genuine inquiry. What muscle is being developed here? What clarity is this creating? What old version of me is this forcing me to leave behind? Because here's what the Stoics knew, and here's what history confirms over and over again. The people who built the most meaningful lives were not the ones who suffered the least. They were the ones who found the most meaning inside the suffering. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and walked out to write one of the most important books of the 20th century. He said this: "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." He didn't call himself a Stoic, but Marcus Aurelius would have recognized him immediately. Amor Fati, love what is. Not because it's comfortable, because it's real, because it's yours, because it is the only path forward that doesn't require you to spend your life at war with reality. Your obstacle is not separate from your story, it is your story. Pillar 3, the observer self, the gap that changes everything. This is the pillar that most people miss, and it's the one that, if you truly understand it, will quietly rewire everything. The Stoics made a distinction between the impression, the automatic emotional hit of something happening, and the judgment, what you decide that impression means. Something happens, your body responds, heart rate changes, jaw tightens, heat rises. That's the impression. That's automatic. That's human. The Stoics never tried to eliminate that. But then, and this is everything, there is a space, a fraction of a second, sometimes longer if you practice, a space between the stimulus and the response, between what happened to you and what you do with what happened to you. Viktor Frankl called it the last of human freedoms. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around it, and most of us never find it, not because it isn't there, but because no one ever taught us to look. We have been trained by speed, by social media, by every cultural force that rewards reactivity, to live without that gap, to feel and immediately act, to think a thought and immediately believe it, receive an emotion and immediately become it. And so we snap. We say the thing we regret. We make decisions from the worst version of ourselves. We burn bridges and betray values and wake up the next morning wondering who that person was. Stoicism says that person was you, but you operating without awareness, you operating on autopilot, and you have the capacity to do something else. The practice is called prosoche. In Greek, it means attention to self, and it is the central discipline of the Stoic life. It is the practice of watching your own mind the way you might watch a river, not trying to stop the river, not judging it, just observing, noticing what's moving through. When anger comes, you don't bury it. You notice it, you name it. You say to yourself, "There is anger rising here. Is this useful? Is what I'm about to do aligned with who I'm choosing to be?" That question, "Is this aligned with who I'm choosing to be?" is one of the most powerful things you can carry with you through a day. Because you are not your anger. You are the one who observes it. You are not your fear. You are the one who watches it rise and decides what to do next. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness behind them, the witness, the one who can choose. This is not a small thing. This is the entire architecture of inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly. He would journal every evening, asking himself, where did I react when I could have responded? Where did I give my peace away to something unworthy of it? Where was I less than I aspire to be? Not to punish himself, to learn, to refine, to close the gap day by day between who he was and who he intended to be. And here's the most important thing about this pillar. It doesn't require perfection. It requires practice. You will lose the gap 100 times. You will react before you remember to pause. You will snap and regret it. You will carry things you should have released. You will become your emotions instead of observing them. And every single time, the Stoic response is the same. Notice, return, begin again. Not with self-punishment, not with shame, with the quiet discipline of a person who has decided that growth matters more than ego. I need you to hear this clearly. The old you, the version that was pushed around by every opinion, every obstacle, every uncontrollable event, that version of you is dead. It has to be, because that version of you was living someone else's life, reacting to someone else's script, measuring itself against someone else's ruler. You belong to no one. Not your past, not your fear, not the voice in your head that tells you you're too late, too broken, too far behind. That voice is not the truth. It is just old conditioning. And conditioning can be changed. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do with what happened. And you are choosing right now. In this moment, every moment is a choice. Even inaction is a choice. So choose. Choose to control what is yours. Release what is not. Choose to walk toward your obstacles instead of around them. Choose to find the gap between stimulus and response and live inside it with intention. Because here is the thing about Stoicism that nobody tells you. It doesn't just make you calmer. It makes you dangerous. Not in anger, not in aggression, but in clarity. A person who cannot be rattled by opinion. A person who turns every obstacle into fuel. A person who watches their own mind with honesty and responds with intention rather than reaction. That person cannot be stopped. Not by failure, not by judgment, not by circumstance, not by loss. You are not the leaf at the mercy of the wind. You are the storm. You are the eye and the center of it, still, clear, unmovable, while everything around you moves. That is the Stoic life. Not a life without pain, a life that is not destroyed by it. Not a life without difficulty, a life that uses difficulty as its foundation. The Stoics had a phrase, memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as morbidity, as a reminder. Time is finite. This moment is real. The life you have right now, as you're watching this, is the only one you get. So stop waiting for the perfect conditions to start becoming who you're capable of being. The conditions are already here. The difficulty is already here. The choice is already here. And so are you. If something in this video shifted something in you, even slightly, then you already know what to do next. Subscribe to this channel, not as a passive click, as a decision. A decision that you are done consuming content that makes you feel good for 5 minutes and then disappears. This channel is built for people who want to go deeper, who want to think harder, who want to live with more intention every day. Every video here is a step, and every step compounds. So make the choice. Hit subscribe, come back, do the work. And before you go, I'll leave you with this. If you had the philosophy of the Stoics 10 years ago, how different would your life look today? And more importantly, what will you do with it now?